Elizabeth Tudor was born on the 7th of September 1553 at Greenwich Palace. She was the daughter of the infamous King Henry VIII and his second wife, Anne Boleyn. Henry not only defied the papacy, but the Holy Roman Emperor to marry Anne, spurred by love, lust, and the desperate need for a legitimate male heir. And so, Elizabeth's birth was one of the most exciting events in European history. The amount of turmoil caused by a mere infant was unprecedented. For the next 2 years, Henry VIII was willing to hope and wait for a son to join this healthy daughter. Right after Elizabeth was born, he wrote to his 17-year-old daughter, Princess Mary, and demanded she relinquish her title as Princess of Wales and acknowledge both the annulment of his marriage to her mother, Catherine of Aragon, and the validity of his new marriage. Mary would neither give up her title nor acknowledge the new marriage. She had already blamed Boleyn and Elizabeth for her own misfortunes. In December, she was moved to her infant half-sister's household. When she was told to pay her respects to the baby princess, she replied that she knew no other princess of England but herself and burst into tears. After 2 miscarriages, Henry VIII was not merely content to annul his marriage to Anne. She was arrested, charged with a variety of crimes that even her enemies discounted, and executed on the 19th of May, 1536. Henry VIII went on with marrying and executing, but for Elizabeth these changes did not go unnoticed. As a child, no one expected her to comment upon her various stepmothers. It was only when she reached adulthood and became queen that the psychological effects were revealed. Elizabeth had a dim view of romantic love as a result of her father's example. Catherine Parr, Henry's sixth and final wife, arranged for 10-year-old Elizabeth to have the most distinguished tutors in England. As a result, Elizabeth was educated as well as any legitimate prince, and she displayed a genuine love and aptitude for her studies, a glorious exception in the days where women were considered inferior to men. During adolescence, Elizabeth was looked on as a serious woman who was always composed. She encouraged this perception, which was very accurate, by dressing with a degree of severity virtually absent at the Tudor royal court. But she was not so serious that she avoided all the material trappings of her position. She lived as a wealthy yet composed woman. Elizabeth was 13 years old when her father died. They were never particularly close, though he treated her with affection on her few visits to his court. Under the 1536 Second Act of Succession, both Elizabeth and Mary were declared illegitimate, which led to Parliament giving Henry the ability to determine his children's status as well as the actual succession. Elizabeth definitely mourned her father, for at least under his rule she was 3 steps from the throne and protected by his rough paternal affection. Despite a series of events involving Catherine Parr's husband and other men in her life, Elizabeth cultivated the image of a sober Protestant young lady. Before she became queen in 1558, she took care to dress the image of chastity and modesty. This was perhaps a conscious attempt to distance herself from Mary, a typical Catholic princess who dressed in all the glittering and garish finery she could afford. She had matured into a tall, slender, and striking girl with a fair, unblemished complexion and the famous Tudor red hair. She wore her hair loose and did not use cosmetics. Elizabeth preferred to let her siblings argue without her. When it became clear that Edward was very ill and would not survive much longer, there was much turmoil over who would succeed power in England. The throne eventually passed to Lady Jane Grey, whose rule infamously lasted only 9 days before Mary became Queen of England. At her coronation, Elizabeth was named her heiress. Mary became wary of her smart younger sister. When Mary made moves to realign England with Catholicism, Elizabeth outwardly conformed, but not so much as to lose the support of her Protestant supporters. Mary intercepted letters that alluded to a false assumption that Elizabeth was trying to overthrow Her Majesty. Elizabeth was brought to the Tower of London and kept as a prisoner. She was released as a result of Mary's fiancé, Prince Philip, telling Mary to release her. She was set free on May 19th, 18 years after her mother's execution. On the 17th of April, 1555, Elizabeth was called to court to attend the final stages of Mary's apparent pregnancy. If Mary and her child died, Elizabeth would become queen. When it became clear that Mary was not pregnant, no one believed any longer that she could have a child. Elizabeth's succession seemed very likely. King Philip acknowledged the new political reality of this and cultivated Elizabeth. She was a better ally than Mary, and it was evident that she would soon accede to the throne. By October 1558, Elizabeth was already making plans for her government. On the 6th of November, Mary recognized Elizabeth as her heir. On the 17th, Mary died. As Elizabeth's triumphal progress wound through the city on the eve of the coronation ceremony, she was welcomed by the citizens and greeted by orations and pageants with a strong Protestant flavor. The following day, on the 15th of January 1559, Elizabeth was crowned at Westminster. Elizabeth's first 2 months as queen went very smoothly, but most European powers were convinced she wouldn't even last a year as queen. If she did, it would only be due to a quick marriage. She handled this issue with exquisite care. Elizabeth's counselors were infuriated by her seemingly little desire to marry. Elizabeth was content to ignore potential suitors. She considered religion to be the most pressing and divisive issue in England. She held her first parliament from January to April 1559. She did not bother to revoke her illegitimacy, as Mary had. This was indicative of Elizabeth's self-confidence and her ability to let the past go. Puritanism garnered much stress for Elizabeth. She was able to keep their movement underground. A few Puritans were executed and many others banished. It remained troublesome to the Queen, but never a real threat. Elizabeth's rule was preferable to any other, and she had become the champion of the Protestant cause. Elizabeth managed to successfully play her suitors off of one another for about 25 years, gaining alliances and wealth from gifts on the possibility of marriage. The later years of Elizabeth's reign are sometimes referred to as the Golden Age of England. During this time, Elizabeth faced several major trials. First, Elizabeth had to deal with Queen Mary of Scots, who had a strong and legitimate claim to the throne of England. When Mary fled back to her own country in the 1560s, she was taken into house arrest in England when she expected the protection of her cousin Elizabeth. Elizabeth, however, recognized Mary as a threat. Eventually, a plot serious enough arose in Mary's name, and Elizabeth had reason enough to sign her death warrant. The greatest military threat to Elizabeth's reign came a year later, when the Armada from Spain sailed toward the tiny island nation. England prevailed and was on its way towards becoming this improved naval power that it was in the 1600s and 1700s. This was also near the time that Robert Dudley died. In the final years of her reign, Elizabeth faced the challenges of increasing Puritan influence and the rebellion of the Earl of Essex. Elizabeth died March 24, 1603, at Richmond Palace, and was succeeded by James I, the son of Queen Mary, Queen of Scots. The Tudor dynasty ended and was passed on to the Stuarts. Citation!